Let's sort of offer a definition for near-death experiences, because there's a wide range of different kinds of supernatural phenomena that sort of fit the bill, but might not. Like when I was 6, I got what I still believe to this day, as skeptical as I am at heart. Honestly, I'm a cynic about a lot of things, but I got this vision about a relative of mine who I'd never known, never met, but who died, and whose mother had been praying for some sort of sign that he was okay. And I was given in a dream, right? It was sort of a dream state thing, no sort of crossing over, no heart stoppage or anything like that. So that's obviously not, by definition, a near-death experience.
Right.
But how do we define these sorts of experiences? What is an NDE?
Yeah, and I mean, there are all kinds of experiences, and people share them with me. I have, because I am a cynic and a skeptic at heart too, I focused in on the ones that it's clinical death.
Okay.
So when people clinically die, your heart stops beating, and within a minute, you have no brain waves.
Right.
Your brain waves cease. And yet these people are resuscitated, either by modern medicine, some cases miracle, some a few minutes, but some hours and hours. And yet they come back. And when they come back, they report being more alive than they ever were, in a body still that was like they were themselves completely. In fact, some people say even more myself.
Wow.
In a place more real, than this, which I had a guy come up to me today after the service, several who had near-death experiences, and said that exact thing.
How many?
4.
4 people from one Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Came and told you this.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and that's the other thing people don't realize. Gallup did a poll in the late 80s of Americans and found out 1 out of 25 Americans has had a near-death experience. That's like 13 million statistically. Yeah. But even more recently, 2019, the European Academy of Neurology reported a study across 35 countries that showed that 5%, 1 out of 20 people in 35 countries have had a near-death experience. So that's why I think it's so important to make sense of them, because this is not just like a weirdo blip out there. This is millions of people.
Right.
But they don't often talk about it.
They don't. Why?
Well, because, like you said, until really 5 years ago, it wasn't out there on the internet for everybody to see.
Right.
It wasn't that known. I mean, people have been studying it for the last 40 years, but it hasn't been accepted in the Christian community.
Yeah.
In the early days, a lot of pastors and other Christians, it spooked them. They didn't know what to think. And so they kind of like, well, just stay away from that.
Right.
And
it's kind of on par with like alien abduction kinds of things, tinfoil hat sort of things, and kind of the woo-woo kind of. It was easily dismissed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they say it is a sacred experience. And the way I like to explain it, and the reason it's so hard for them to talk about, is how do you explain something more real than this?
Right.
But that's what they consistently say. And the way I explain it to people who haven't had a near-death experience after interviewing so many is by analogy. So imagine, right now we're living a 3-dimensional experience.
Sure.
But imagine if we were living this experience actually on a flat 2-dimensional black and white painting in your room.
Yeah.
And death means separation. So at death, your 2-dimensional self is peeled off that flat painting and brought out into this 3-dimensional room of color that was around you all the time. You just couldn't perceive of it because you didn't have a 3rd dimension to even perceive in. And now you're experiencing 3 dimensions of color. You're more alive than you were in your flat world, and you can see your flat world for what it is because it's a part of this bigger realm.
Right.
Then you're pressed back into the flat world, and now you have to explain 3 dimensions of color, but in 2-dimensional black and white terms.
What would you say?
Well, and that's what they say when I use that analogy with them. They say, oh, absolutely, that's it.
Yeah.
Because what they're experiencing is multidimensional to our dimensionality.
Does it depress them to go back into the painting?
Usually.
Really?
usually. I've met a few who wanted to go back, but most begged to stay.
Wow.
And the Lord either tells them, no, you still have a purpose to fulfill. You have to go back.
Yeah.
And sends them back. In some cases, he gives them a choice.
Right. What's the scientific explanation? Like, how does science maybe answer some of the questions in its way, like in ways that might even contradict our interpretation as Christians, like what you're writing about in the book? Like, how does science explain it away?
Alternate explanations?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in chapter 2 of Imagine the God of Heaven, this new book, I go through the 10 points of evidence that convince me, but not just me, many skeptical medical doctors believe that this shows proof of consciousness surviving death.
Really?
And yeah, I'll go just a few of them, but one is verifiable observations. Mm-hmm. This is the one that got my attention. So at first I was like, yeah, who knows what that is? But then what people say is when they first die, they leave their body, they still have a spiritual body, and initially they're often up above their body, observing, up above their physical body,
right,
observing the resuscitation or what's happening in the room. Now, there have actually been studies done, because there, an example of this would be like in the new book, there's a woman in London who dies giving childbirth. And she's up above her body, and then she goes through a tunnel in this beautiful place. She's with God. She doesn't want to come back, but he says, no, you need to go back. Your son, Michael, is going to live. And, she didn't know if he was dying too. She comes back, and as she's coming back, she comes through the ceiling toward her body, and she sees on the top side of a ceiling fan a red sticker.
Yeah.
And she comes back into her body. They shock her twice. She sees them shocking her twice. She comes to, and she starts trying to tell the doctors and nurses of this incredible experience, and nobody believes her, and they think it's just psychosis or whatever. And finally, she gets a nurse to listen, because she told the nurse things she said.
Right.
When this woman was comatose, she shouldn't have heard any of that or seen. And she said, look, I'll prove it to you. Get a ladder and go look on the top side of that ceiling fan, and you'll find a sticker, a red sticker. And this is what it says on the sticker. And the nurse and an orderly see it, and they're like, it was there.